Good morning and happy Monday to all you swampers out there. Today's lesson titled A Proclamation for All. Proclamation for All. And our target question: what was the Proclamation of 1763 and what was its impact on the colonies? So let us begin with the raising of our hands. Hands up nice and high, everybody. And down. Previously in the swamp. Dun-dun-dun, dun-dun-dun. Rebellion was last on our agenda, and that rebellion, of course, from Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa tribe, when he was able to successfully uh, rally 12 different Native American tribes and raise a fighting force of over 3,500 Native American warriors to continue the aggression towards these westward moving colonists following the French and Indian War. So just because the French and Indian War was over and the French were vanquished out of North America doesn't mean that the English didn't continue to have problems with, one, the French settlers that remained, known as the Acadians, and two, the Native Americans of the Ohio Indians who wanted to continue to fight for the land that they felt was theirs. They did not like this rushing movement of English settlers moving onto their territory. So Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa tribe put his foot down and stood up to these westward moving Englishmen and, recaptured 8 British forts and waged warfare on any of these colonists that were already settled out in the frontier. So you guys last week on Friday had to deal with this rebellion, but you had to do it from the king's perspective as the leader of the British Empire. So when dealing with this rebellion, you had a number of different solutions at your hands. One, you could have used British soldiers to guard these new lands. It would take up to approximately 10,000 soldiers to be able to guard these new lands to make sure that the natives and the settlers were getting along and staying out of each other's ways. All right. Option B was to use colonial militias to do this. So this would be the less costly option, because you would be using colonial militias, not British soldiers, to do it. And you would ask the colonial governments to chip in for this solution here. Option C told you to just draw a line. I call this the old go to your rooms solution, right? So just like if you were fighting with your siblings and your parents sent you to your rooms, okay, does that really squash the aggression or squash the beef? Not always, right? So sometimes it allows the rivalry to continue to fester and it really doesn't extinguish the flame of aggression here. But drawing a line and telling these English settlers or the colonists, you have to stay on one side of the line, and Native Americans, you have to stay on the other side of the line. That was another potential solution that you had to analyze last week. Negotiating gift giving was another one. So, the Native Americans have problems. That's why they're rebelling. That's why they're fighting. They want their land back. So maybe you try to strike up some kind of negotiation and you give them some gifts to sweeten the deal. And then option E, which was a popular one amongst you guys, it was just, hey, we're Great Britain here. We don't back down to Native American aggression. We're just going to destroy/crush Pontiac's rebellion. So these were 5 viable options that you had to weigh the pros and cons of, and then ultimately decide which one you would want to do. But while you were thinking about these solutions, these are some questions that you probably should have considered. Like, how strong are the British soldiers and can they defeat the Native Americans? Now, we know the British military is considered to be one of the strongest in the world, but how great are they really when it comes to fighting in the woods against these Native Americans? Can they beat the natives? Yeah, probably, but it's going to take many thousands of soldiers to do so, which means a lot of money and resources committed to this. And does Great Britain really want to do that? All right. A second question to consider was, well, how strong are your colonial fighters? Well, we saw George Washington in action, folks, and they weren't very strong at all. And maybe they learned a few tips and tricks from fighting alongside the British during the French and Indian War. All right. But were they really equipped to fight the Native Americans? And could they raise enough fighters to guard the frontier? The answer to that is probably no. Why were the Native Americans rebelling is another question to consider. I think it's because they don't want these English settlers on their land. They've been getting ripped off, they've been getting backstabbed, and they're having their homeland stole right out from under them. So, how willing are they to actually stop fighting with these English settlers? Okay, next question. Will the colonists actually be willing to pay for soldiers? And have they been cooperative in the past? Really, during the French and Indian War, folks, the colonists really weren't that willing to pay for their own soldiers or even provide their own soldiers. And even though this is a fight they started because they wanted to expand their boundaries, they weren't willing to commit as many soldiers and money to the war effort as you would have thought. So that one, not really were they willing to pay. At the end of the war, when things looked good, then they were more willing to pay, of course. And the last one, how important to the British is it to pay off the French and Indian War debt? And I can't stress this one enough. It's very important. Great Britain's debt is going to soar to over 140 million pounds following this war. And on top of that, they're going to have to pay 1.1 million pounds of interest a year for every year they don't pay off this debt. So William Pitt's reckless style of spend, spend, spend is going to come back to bite them here. And Great Britain is very motivated to pay off this debt. So these were some questions for you to consider. So which one or which solution did you think was the best? Wait, what's that? Did you say something? Oh, it seems we have a message from the king, from King George III. So, as we're thinking about all these different solutions and some of these questions that we have, it seems the king has something to tell us.
To my loyal subjects in my glorious colonies, we have just defeated the French and their Indian allies, and now have control over their lands. We have banded together during this war, and shown others how strong we are. Even though we were victorious, this war was very costly. Much money was spent, and many brave men died. In order to keep you safe, we must prevent further conflict with the native people. Therefore, today I proclaim no colonial settlers will be allowed to cross the Appalachian Mountains into Indian territory. We shall not bother the Indians on the western side of the mountains, and all settlers will remain firmly on the eastern side. If you have already settled west of this new boundary, you must return to the safety of the eastern side. In order to keep the border safe, I will be sending additional troops to my colonies. Do not forget that you are subjects of Britain and must obey my laws.
Wait, what? What? That proclamation that you just heard is what's known as the Proclamation of 1763. What was it that the king just told us? Wait a second. Did he say that the colonists need to stay firmly planted on the eastern side of the Appalachian Mountains and that no colonial settlers are allowed to move west of the Appalachians? Did he just call a halt to the settlers' westward expansion? And did he set the Appalachian Mountains as the western boundary for the colonists? And the Native Americans will be able to live in that land? Did the king decide of those options A through E to do C, draw a line which sounded like the most idiotic of all the solutions? Oh, King, what are you doing? And why would you do such a thing? Ay, ay, ay. So, some of the unhappy provisions here of the Proclamation 1763, look at all the ways that it's going to affect the colonists in a negative way. All right, it's going to create governments for new territories, one from France, but it's going to forbid settlement of lands west of the Proclamation, meaning these settlers, these colonists that fought side by side with the British military here to win this land is not going to be allowed to live there. And it requires settlers who already started pouring west of this proclamation line that they're going to have to pick up and move back. And worst of all, no refunds. Even if you sold everything to move out there and to get a fresh start on this land that you feel you rightfully deserve, you need to pick up your belongings and move back. And all previous land purchases, a lot of farmers, a lot of merchants, a lot of land speculators bought land out there expecting to make a profit off of it. But now those land purchases will not be recognized by the British government, and nor will you be refunded. So the colonists have every right to be mad about this proclamation in 1763. But you know who's smiling about it? Those Native American savages. This proclamation on the surface was created to prevent future conflicts between the colonists and the Native Americans. And it's going to allow the natives to govern themselves under their own laws. And they're also going to benefit from having the British as these new trade partners who are going to attempt to practice fairness with all land sales and trade transactions. So the colonists are extremely frustrated with this proclamation being handed down to them. Meanwhile, the Native Americans are super excited about it because it's meant to bring peace between the natives and, of course, these westward moving colonists. So the aftermath now looks like this, if you need a visual. These were the colonies before the French and Indian War, and these are the colonies before the proclamation. Unfortunately, it's also going to be the colonies after the proclamation. The colonists will not get to enjoy any of this new land out in the west that is west of the Appalachian Mountains. And then to make sure that these colonists are following the proclamation, they're going to station 10,000 British soldiers in the frontier to make sure that the colonists do not move out west. And you know who they're also going to let live out in the western frontier? British soldiers that served during the French and Indian War. So, talk about another reason for colonial anger and resentment. But why are the British doing this, you ask? It has everything to do with the national debt of Great Britain. Because following this war, they're 140 million pounds in the hole. And their citizens are getting taxed and taxed and taxed. And now we're going to see the colonists are going to start being asked to pay for their protection. Because, like I said, Great Britain's going to station 10,000 troops to man the proclamation line, and they're going to ask the colonists to pay for their own protection, to pay for these 10,000 British troops. So Great Britain obviously doing this to save a little money and to prevent conflict with the Native Americans, but also they got a sneaky reason in mind. They want to keep the colonists pinned to the East Coast. They're afraid if the colonists begin to move westward and continue to expand and move out west, well, guess what? They might not need the British as much as they once did. They won't continue to serve as markets for British products and British goods. And maybe they'll start manufacturing for themselves and not rely on Great Britain economically at all. And this would be a total disaster for Great Britain. So perhaps that's some of the motivation of why Great Britain is doing what they're doing. Maybe on the surface they say, oh, it's to keep you safe, colonists. We don't want you fighting with the Native Americans. But maybe in reality, they want firm control of the fur trade out west, but they also want to keep the colonists pinned to the East Coast, those sneaky, sneaky Brits. So today, what do I want you to do? I want you to complete this Ed puzzle, obviously, that you were just watching, but I also want you to work on my A Proclamation for All. Question mark, question mark, question mark, competing perspectives activity. Let me show you what it looks like here. Okay, one thing that we always try to stress in the classroom here, of course, is that there are multiple perspectives to everything. All right, so for this activity, I want you to try to capture the different perspectives of the three different parties involved with the proclamation. So the American colonists, the British government, and the Native Americans. So it says the effects of the proclamation 1763 were felt throughout the colonies, would have a damaging impact on the relationship between the mother country and her colonies. But did everybody look at the proclamation land restriction policy with disgust and contempt? Using the chart, please evaluate the impact of the proclamation and fill in the pros and cons chart for the groups listed below. So, ladies and gents, just give me a bullet or two of information in each box of how they would perceive the positives of the proclamation and the negatives. What do the colonists like about it? What do they hate about it? What does the British government benefit from this? What do they not like? What's a negative for them? And then, of course, Native Americans, pros and cons. All right, so ladies and gents, that is it for today. All right. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to email or private message or class comment. All right. Hoping that everybody's having a wonderful Monday here. And best of luck with our proclamation for all. All right. And have a great